For many, many entrepreneurs, our need to be liked and approved of is sometimes the sole driver of why we have no boundaries. We rarely explore the reality of what happens when we're clear. Welcome to the Soul-Sourced Podcast, unconventional business advice for the highly creative, secretly sensitive, and wildly ambitious entrepreneur. I'm your host, Kane. Let's do this. All right, welcome everybody. You are listening to the Soul-Sourced Business Podcast, and this is episode number 10. And I'm doing something a little unconventional here. Not that by episode 10 you can call it unconventional because we haven't really established a convention, but I'm saying it's unconventional. This is actually part 2 of what became a 2-part episode when I started teaching all about boundaries last week, only to realize that there was so much important stuff to say about this issue in your business. So I decided to carry over and create a part number 2. I left you with a major cliffhanger to end all cliffhangers at the end of episode 9, and I'm betting some of you could barely make it through this week, just waiting for today's episode. If you didn't listen to episode 9, I do recommend that you take a gander at that first, or whatever it is when you go listen. What's the equivalent of taking a gander when you listen? But it's there for you. But I'm not going to come after you and stand outside your front door and yell at you if you didn't listen to that one yet. But we are talking about boundaries here. And specifically, we are talking about when boundaries get broken. And even more specifically, we're talking about when boundaries get broken in our businesses. So a quick recap of what we walked through last time. I started with a mildly upsetting and embarrassing story from my early days as a songwriter, where I almost spent a good deal of the evening in an HVAC storage unit. And then I shared a story of a client who is having post-COVID boundaries broken, and that's time and space and errands and family and you name it. And then I walked through 3 questions to ask yourself when you find yourself in a situation where boundaries have been broken, after which you could then determine where your best cleanup could begin, either with realigning with and resetting some standards and boundaries for yourself, or communicating with the other person or persons involved. And that's when I walked through the 4 steps that will set you up for that kind of communication, for a better conversation with somebody when a boundary has been broken, so you could make a clear request. Whew, it was a lot, which is why I divided it up. And yes, ultimately, boundaries are an issue of clarity. And as with all things in a soul-sourced business, the place to turn is within. And that means you look inside of you first to find where and when you stopped being clear, when you settled, when you tolerated, and when you said yes when you didn't want to, when you trained people around you to not honor your clarity, because ultimately it's about our own communication and our own clarity. And on this episode, we're going to uncover the patterns. These are 5 core beliefs that make us avoid being clear and seemingly force us to break our own boundaries in what appears to be those kinds of, I had no choice, my hands were tied scenarios. But we do have a choice, and our hands aren't tied. They just feel like they're tied because we have these deep-seated beliefs that mess with us and make us unclear. So today we're going to dive into those, thereby denying them the ability and leverage to rule us anymore. And just to get you started here, this is an example from one of my clients who was on a coaching call last week, and I will call her Judith. And Judith is a I'm making up her profession, by the way, because she is in a very, very obvious profession. It's a very cool profession. And I'm going to make it up so we can keep Judith's privacy. So we're going to say she's a career specialist, and Judith helps people get promoted and find new jobs, and she's very successful at it. And this week, one of Judith's long-term clients, this is an executive, a professional that she has worked with for a little over a year now. This person got great results, and now this client is in love with Judith and just feels very, very devoted to her. And on their last call, she asked Judith to be her coach because she now wants to build a small business on the side. She trusts Judith, she knows Judith, and she knows that Judith has her own business and she wants to keep paying her very big fees to coach her as she builds an entirely new thing from what their coaching started as. Now, Judith, for her part, loves her clients. She gets very close to them because of the kind of work they do. And she believes that this woman can really succeed at her own business. And you can't deny that it's pretty nice when someone is just wanting to hand their money over to you to help them. And that brings us to the first core belief that derails us and makes us violate our own boundaries, often before we even know what's happening. And that belief is that people's opinions of us matter more than our own clarity and wisdom. For many, many entrepreneurs, our need to be liked and approved of is sometimes the sole driver of why we have no boundaries. We rarely explore the reality of what happens when we're clear. Instead, we just knee-jerk into a yes or a sure without pausing to check inside. And Judith felt instantly torn because she genuinely wants to serve her client, and she knows that she probably could. She loves this client, and this client trusts her and wants to give her more money now. But, and here's the real question, at what expense to her sanity, her services, and her ability to serve her other clients and keep her business streamlined? So if you have the disease to please, and you're addicted to the good opinions of others, then this will be an ongoing journey for you in terms of keeping boundaries and standards operating in your business. What I can tell you is that up-leveling your business, that's what we call it here at Uplevel, whether that's about scaling or making more money or even just eliminating overwhelm, is a lot more about what you say no to than what you say yes to. And it may seem like that instant yes brings all the praise and the approval that you're addicted to or the money you want, but over time, it can carry with it a low-grade resentment of your clients and all the people you said yes to because their approval is no match for your inner sense of confidence, that foundation of clarity and peace, not to mention your honesty. And this is where, before we move into the next core belief, I want to introduce an idea to you called the nudge. That's what I'm calling it. And the reason I chose to start with Judith's story is that it illuminates a key moment in her own relationship with her clarity and her business. She had enough awareness to know that she needed a quick conversation with me. She felt the nudge, that little intuitive hit that said, I think I need to step back here. So when Judith and I really looked at it together, when I asked her directly, Judith said that deep inside, she knew she didn't really want to do this kind of work and that it's not her superpower. And boom, there's your nudge, right? Judith knew, she totally knew she didn't want to do this. And we all get these nudges. They're subtle and they have this tiniest little red flag. And contained in that little red flag is this feeling of all the energy that just knows. It knows exactly who we are and what we want to do and don't want to do. And again, it's often a subtle, intuitive sense. But we ignore that nudge. Why? Well, first, because our thoughts, these thoughts that derail us constantly, are so much louder. And we've trained ourselves to believe our thoughts and our doubts and our fears more than we trust our insides, our nudges. And this happens because so many of us are in such a rush in our days that we've trained ourselves out of the practice of pausing long enough to listen to that still small voice. We're all quick starts, to use Colby vernacular. And in the rush of our days, we forget that the nudge is even worthy of our attention because we have learned to dismiss our own inner guidance system. Our thoughts shout, our doubts shout, and nudges just, quietly nudge. And if you, like most people, have been conditioned throughout your life, if you've been trained to ignore your own inner guidance system and pay attention only to other people's opinions, then most likely you've lost some of your ability to trust your own wisdom altogether. And renewing that trust is its own journey, and it's totally worth doing. And Judith said she felt like she had to do this service for her client. Even though she felt that little nudge, she felt this even greater pressure from a lifetime of training herself to seek approval from others. So the reason I'm sharing Judith's story is because at the end of our conversation, Judith realized that she didn't want to take this on. She decided to have the tough conversation. And what she did was she mended a potential broken boundary. And it's a boundary that she would have been the one to have broken. Let's be clear about that. She has worked with me long enough now to know that she needed to honor her clarity, because the likely result would be that she would not enjoy her business if she took on something that she didn't ultimately want to do. What's interesting here is Judith's response as we were wrapping up that conversation. It was this quick, dismissive response. But those of you who are coaches know that in coaching, when you pay attention, those dismissive responses are often indicators of other old underlying beliefs. And her response was, okay, so I guess now I have to go be a meanie to this person. And this tiny little dismissive sentence is a perfect segue into our second core belief that leads us to broken boundaries. And I had to walk Judith through this, but that belief is that clarity is mean. That being clear is a surefire sign that you are a class A top shelf asshole, and that everybody will hate you if you're clear. We are so scared of people being disappointed in us, which ultimately means we have an underlying pattern of basing our entire identity on the opinions of others. So we strive to make sure no one is ever disappointed in our decisions or in us, and we ensure that by not having clarity or boundaries or preferences or requests. The truth is that some people, usually it's the people who aren't clear themselves, will indeed make a stink if you're clear, or they will judge you, or they will be disappointed and let you know how disappointed they are. But there's another truth, and that is that people will trust you for being honest, and they will respect you for being honest, which isn't why you do this at all. You don't be clear and have boundaries because of all the respect you'll get. You do it because it's far more rewarding and clean in your business if you are clear and honest and communicate respectfully what you do and what you don't do. And it's about your own relationship with yourself. And ultimately, it is an act of kindness. I think Brene Brown likes to say, clear is kind. And I love that. It's just so true. And by the way, a quick side note here. This, I want to make sure you get this. This isn't to say that everyone in Judith's situation would come to her same conclusion. So too often I will teach something like this, and then people will only hear the outcome, and they'll make up some kind of thing like Christine says to never take money for a service you don't provide and never offer anything outside of what you do, which isn't what I'm saying at all. This is not about little tactics and how-tos. This is about you looking deeply at you and your clarity. If you turn this into a rule, then that probably points to your own avoidance of your inner guidance system and your clarity. So let's move on to the third core belief that makes us break our own boundaries, and that is that only divas get to have boundaries. So in other words, you don't get to have boundaries because you haven't arrived yet, or you're not Judith yet, and you don't have the luxury of turning people away. After all, in my story from the last episode, I ended up in the HVAC closet, right? And the star of the show got the green room. I wasn't worthy of boundaries. And I think this comes from the fact that we all have these remnants of those old, who do you think you are voices that run amok in our head, no matter where we are in our business success. We think that only divas get to have boundaries because, after all, we're just us, right? Not true. Especially when you're getting started in your business, it's crucial that you honor yourself and your time. And it's important no matter where you are in your business. But if you feel like you haven't earned the right to your own clarity, then that points even more to needing some. So when you're getting started in business, or even if you're way into your business and you realize this is an issue for you, I want you to consider a practice, because this clarity thing often gets learned through experience. I want you to consider that every situation that arises where you have broken boundaries, it's not something to be embarrassed about or ashamed of. It's actually fodder for your own internal growth as a business owner. And this is what I mean by being a soul-sourced entrepreneur. Your business is always talking to you. It's always shaping you and teaching you about you. So in this case, every stress in your business points to the possible need for a standard or the need for some kind of clarity, which is why boundaries getting broken is actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity to step back and say, when exactly did I stop being clear, like we talked about on the last episode? So many times that question reveals that you were never clear at all because you haven't put yourself into the equation of how your business is going to run well. And this happens especially when it's early days in a business venture and we don't have any outside person or boss, if you're used to having a boss, to tell us how to think or how to spend our time. And no one around us yet honors or takes seriously the fact that we're doing this. So we are essentially building a new skill set. And I will give you an example of when I used this practice to overcome this particular belief that I had to be big and successful before I created any boundaries. When I first started hosting retreats, and this was a long time ago when I was still a musician, I would have 25 or 30 women at this amazing retreat center here outside of Asheville. It's called Bend of Ivy Lodge, and shout out to Susan over at Bend of Ivy. And because I hadn't hosted retreats before, I didn't realize that there were so many components of keeping 30 people comfortable and happy. So I'd be teaching and I'd be, being the retreat leader. And one of the participants would come up and say, "I'm cold. Can you adjust the temperature?" And so I would go do it. And then someone else would say, "Did you remember I'm a vegan? Did that get communicated to the chef?" And I'd march on into the kitchen and I'd check on that. And each one of these interruptions, while seemingly small, was a hit to my focus and my ability to serve people. And I don't think I had that language at the time because I wasn't aware of what was going on. But what was clear was that I ended up feeling exhausted after those 3 days because this was new to me, and I thought this was just how it works when you host retreats. Well, after one of those retreats, I did kind of an audit. I did an assessment of those 3 days, and I realized that this was a stress. And I asked myself how I could back it up and remove that particular stress rather than just, potentially barking at someone, "Go fix the damn heat yourself," or something similarly inappropriate. I decided to ask one of my regular attendees if she could come for those 3 days for free and be sort of my assistant and take care of all these little housekeeping items during the retreat. And that way, at the start of the retreat, I could say, "Hey everyone, this is Nell. She is your go-to person for anything related to your comfort levels or food issues or any kind of need that arises." And even though this was early days in my event hosting life, I had found a fix that let me honor what I was there to do, which was to teach and be present to the attendees and not have to run around fixing the little normal, natural problems that arise. So the boundary got mended. And I didn't have to tell anyone to stop bothering me or get annoyed with these needy people or whatever story someone might tell themselves. And again, it's so easy to think, these are little tiny retreats. I shouldn't be such a diva, which is what most of us do. We believe we don't have, we don't get to have any kind of boundary if we're not Oprah. But what I can tell you is that the more I created clear boundaries like this, the better I got at leading and teaching and serving people. And those retreats grew into what became a pretty awesome coaching company when the time was right to pivot in my own life trajectory. The fourth core belief is a big one. It's all about money. And that is that money always comes first. Money wins, especially in business. So as business owners, we are supposed to take money when it's offered, right? And Judith likes this person and she wants to help her. And then you combine that with she's going to make more money. Why wouldn't she just do this new business opportunity? And this is not to say I don't want you to make money and set premium prices in your business. I love helping entrepreneurs up-level their pricing. But the difference is that they aren't giving all their power over to money. What they're doing when they're getting clear on pricing strategies is they're tuning into their own value. They give their power over to money when they ignore their boundaries. And this is when you have to remember that the bottom line is not just the financial bottom line. The bottom line, the real one, is your clarity. And if you let money lead you around and be your primary decision maker and clarity bringer, then your business is set up as a power drain and you ultimately lose. So in my 10 years of coaching and also in every aspect of my own businesses, when anyone unravels the power that money has over them, myself included, and when we can create this kind of clarity, what happens is that the universe tends to hand us more money. When I was a musician, I had to constantly up-level my own vision for where I wanted to perform, how much I commanded for my fees, and based on those parameters, when I would settle for less than those fees. And it never failed. I would make that decision. I would set that price. I would decide I wasn't going to perform in certain venues or for certain price levels. And some offer would come rolling down the pike and it was much less money. And perhaps it was from someone I genuinely liked and worked with before. And every little cell inside of me would say, you know what, Christine, you're lucky to even be playing music for a living. Who are you to turn down money? Just be nice. Be thankful you have anything. And I had to learn how to manage my energy and power and clarity in those situations, which became an enormous gift to me, even if it meant that people ultimately thought I was a snob, or they projected their own shit about money onto me, or they thought I was a jerk. Remember that people who aren't clear will often be the first ones to judge you when you are clear. And that brings us to our final core belief, which is that we can avoid tough conversations about boundaries and still have a successful business. And I don't know if this is an actual belief as much as it is just a pattern I see in many business owners. They avoid confrontation. They avoid vulnerability. They avoid the communication of their expectations and clarity. And I will say this, most people don't know how to have a boundary conversation. And I walked through some basic steps in the last episode, which was part 1 of this whole conversation about boundaries. And of course, just knowing those steps doesn't guarantee that your conversations will be easy or will go well or that everybody will agree with you that you're so great now that you have boundaries. But we have to begin to trust ourselves to share our clarity, to honor the other person by being clear, and to honor ourselves when a boundary has been broken or needs to be shared. In my masterminds in Uplevel Academy, we call it, we have a mantra that we say, and that mantra is, I'm in. And the reason I created that mantra, it was years ago, and it's because one of the biggest diseases I saw with business owners is that they would turn their backs on their business when things got uncomfortable. And I'm in was a way to teach people to be present in their business. And nowhere is that more important than in our conversations with people around our clarity, around our expectations, and around our needs. I've quoted Tim Ferriss before, and I'll share this again. It's one of my favorite things that he says, and it is that the measure of one's success is directly correlated to the number of uncomfortable conversations they're willing to have. Avoiding discomfort is a normal, natural thing that we all want to do. But as your business grows, there's going to be more and more people involved, and you're going to have to communicate your clarity, preferably up front. And that means having contracts for things that you agree to do together. And that means setting up expectations for employees and for contractors. And it means as much as possible that you are clear up front. And then if something doesn't go well, or if there is a stress, you make it right. You say, I'm in. And you reset your boundaries, or you have that conversation and you learn how to have those conversations. Too often people equate the idea of honesty or clarity with, I get to unload all of my knee-jerk opinions onto your ass and you have to sit there and listen. And that's not it at all. So go back and listen to the last podcast and get the book, Say What You Mean by Oren J. Sofer, and trust that this is a skill set worth having and an activity that's worth doing. Even if it derails your productivity list for that day just a little bit, because it does take work at first. In the end, Clarity and communication pay off way more than just being able to check your tasks off of a list or running around in your usual rush. Business is people. And for those who are a bit on the sensitive side, that is an uncomfortable reality because it just seems easier to avoid or to hide or to dismiss or just roll with it because you're too uncomfortable to have a clear and real conversation with someone. And I will remind you again that we are at a time where emotions are running high in the world. And so there is deep value in becoming that person who doesn't let your emotions run your business or run your life or have the keys to the car. But you can still have your emotions. You can still have your snarky thoughts. It's just so powerful to find the clear and equanimous response so that your energy stays clear and powerful. And that ultimately, combined with when you start up-leveling your income and your profits and your business runs well, that is the reward. It feels so amazing to have that strong foundation. Okay, my friends, we've done it. We've made it through episode 10 of the Soul Sourced Business Podcast. And what I'm trying to do here on this podcast is really go deeper and address some of the things that I cover in my book. It comes out in November. It's my first book. And I wanted to add some different perspectives and angles to everything that's already in that book. And if you want to go grab it now, it is up for pre-sale on Amazon.com. It is called The Soul-Sourced Entrepreneur. And in the meantime, I'm doing this podcast here every week, and you can subscribe. We all get to hang out each week together and talk about the stuff that no one seems to talk about when it comes to owning and running and building and up-leveling, as we call it here, your business and your role as an entrepreneur and being a creative force field in this world at this crazy time. And if you know other people who want to be force fields for good in this crazy time, in their work, in their business, please send them to this podcast. Send them this episode if you think it'll help. And again, thank you a million times over for listening. And thanks to everyone who's written me to say they bought the book. I so love that and I appreciate that. And if there is a topic that you want to make sure I cover in future episodes, you can send me an email to podcast@uplevelU.com, and I will see you next time.
Well, her job was no more than a cubicle, the opposite of beautiful. Her soul for a check, but her smile tells you that she found a deeper will she didn't know she had until the day that she left. And even though she's flying high, she can't help but wonder why it took her half her lifetime just to find out she could let herself learn how to be real, to be radiant, to be elegant in her clumsy kind of way. Oh, here's to